Welcome to the Wicked Podcast, where we read the business books you don't have the time for. I'm Marcus Kirsch.
And I'm Troy Norcross.
And we are your co-hosts for the Wicked Podcast.
All right, Marcus, can you tell anything different about maybe like a haircut, maybe like new beard trim?
Maybe you just said so? Yeah, you look slicker than ever. 10 years
Yes.
younger. There you go.
That's what I want to hear. And I'm really sorry, Marcus. I'm so sorry that the lovely Alona brought you home a present of a cold.
Yeah, I'm a little bit under the weather, but I'm nearly back out of it. So, and it's not COVID, thank God. So, yeah.
The thing is, for our listeners, you're willing to go the extra mile, and we're going to keep recording even if you've got a cold, right?
I take on sitting here in my chair as usual, just with a bit more Vic Vaporub smeared across my nose.
Well, it's better than what you
Too much
usually do,
detail.
which usually have a whiskey in your hand, but that's another whole topic for another day. Who have
Yeah.
we got on the show today?
So on today's show, we have Perry Timms and his book, The Energized Workplace. And it was a really lovely discussion. I think he's a great guy, and the book's really lovely. What were your takeaways?
I'm a huge fan of the quote around Milton Friedman that you got to maximize shareholder value. And it really kind of dawned on me during the discussions today that employee energy is another resource. And if all we're trying to do is return value to shareholders, we're going to extract that employee energy and try to convert that into shareholder value. It's not a long-term sustainable strategy. So to business leaders and to people, employees and leaders, look, employee energy, it's not another resource to exploit. The other thing is, and it was great for him to say, and I'll let him tell the story during the interview, that he and the publisher had to have words about it, but he included the Eastern philosophy about chakras and the various chakras of energy centers within the body. And I think that's really, really great. So you know what? I believe it does have, because if we know nothing else, we're always being told that meditation is a key part of overall wellness. And I really think that if you can focus and bring meditation and well-being and the energies of the chakras together, you can indeed build a better workforce. And those were my two takeaways. What about you?
Yeah, and I will approach it, as much as I agree with your takeaways, approach it from a slightly more, will I say financial level? Maybe not. But what I've seen a lot in my practice is when you bring service design or design thinking to companies, you don't pay attention to what you don't measure, and if you never measured it before, you're having a hard time selling it into an organization. And I think it's the same with this, right? The aspect of your workforce and people and how to maintain that energy. And if you don't measure it, if you don't measure both positive and negative impact of your actions, you won't do anything about it. So my takeaway essentially is that he said, and I challenge him a bit on that, with the question is, do we need a particular person to bring that to the company? And it's like, well, someone needs to own it. And you need to bring it in terms of starting to figure out how to measure it. And the way you measure it is that you actually connect the pieces that are already happening, that you can evidence, to potentially a financial impact. And that sometimes gets an organization taking the first step towards it. Not unlike what I saw with a sustainability client of mine, where we looked at energy savings and that, but beyond that monetary benefit or that energy benefit, they did not register the extra value, which is the fact that the company was investing in sustainability and those positive mindsets positively impacted their retention rate, attracting better talent, which you can calculate into money saved or more value gathered or more value representing to the outside world. You can put numbers on this. And when you start doing that, you realize you're doing actually more than you think with some things that aren't often measured in that way or aren't often measured at all. So try to measure more and try to find the connections is my big takeaway in order to get to that into that space that is so valuable. So that's my takeaway there.
What gets measured gets managed. And I'm measuring that it's 4 minutes and 55 seconds in the intro, and that means we're almost at the limit. So what should we do, Marcus?
We should go to the interview. Hello, everyone. Today we're here with Perry Timms. Hello, Perry. Welcome to the show.
Hello there. Great to be here.
So, as usual, we start from the top. So, in order to get a bit of context, please tell our listeners who you are and why you wrote the book.
Fantastic. Thank you. Yes. So I'm an independent practitioner that you could say operates in HR, but I like to think it's a lot more than that. The kind of work that the team and I do is largely around helping people create their best selves at work. And by virtue of that, we help with the performance of organizations, and they've got a sustainable method of keeping on top of all the challenges, I guess, that we both expected and didn't expect in the last few years and months and years. Yeah, we're global. We've got clients in all sectors, and we adopt, I suppose, an approach that looks at human-centered design and try and to develop organizations, I guess, so that they are prepared for the future, but they're performing well now. And the reason for writing the book, so I've had a fascination with energy for a while, and it's in my job title, Chief Energy Officer, possibly because I've developed a sense of enthusiasm for what I do. I worked in the civil service in the UK, in the courts. It wasn't always the happiest place to be because we were dealing with things like bankruptcies and repossessions. Yet I saw the role there as helping create safe and protected ways for people to seek justice. So I could see the good in it. And I would go on training courses with my colleagues, and they would all be moaning about boring or workloads or whatever. And I'd be sitting there thinking, am I the only one who really enjoys this? Anyway, so that's kind of stuck with me throughout my career. And then as I got into the realms of being a freelancer and the ups and downs of that I still found myself loving it, even though there were times when I'm thinking, where's my next invoice coming in, right? And so I'm thinking, how have I got so much energy for my work? Yet I see so many people in a state of zombification, literally trundling through life and only coming alive after work. And I thought there's something wrong. I did some research. I went to speak to some companies. I got this sense that it's poor design that has created this kind of, I suppose you'd say, sort of burden that people have for work. And I thought, well, if we've designed it that badly, we can undesign it or redesign it so that it becomes a flourishing experience. And that was the essence, really, for the whole book.
Interesting. So you reference energy in so many different ways throughout the book, and I found it really interesting that you kind of pull energy as a thing. And one of the things that we talk about is, and I talk about a lot on the show, is the Milton Friedman notion that the only reason for capitalism is to maximize shareholder value, allegedly within the rules. And over a period of the last, 40 or 50 years, since the late 70s, we found that capitalism continues to go to its natural extremes and pillage and plunder natural resources and society and goodwill, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And it came to me, and I was talking about it with Marcus just before you came onto the show. Really, employee energy is another resource that is being pillaged and plummeted, by capitalism in its attempt to deliver shareholder value. And I think it does create the situation where people are drained. How, as organizations, can leaders and or CEOs or even boards of directors move the needle away from pure, what I call shareholder capitalism, to more of a balanced stakeholder capitalism that includes the employee and put some energy back in instead of just taking energy out?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's a terrific question. Thank you, Troy. I think the thing I'll say about it is there is a dawning movement and a realization that you use the word balance, and it absolutely has to be about balance. So, the Business Roundtable's declaration in 2019 really enamored me because it stated explicitly that it wasn't just shareholder value. It was quite literally trying to detach from Friedman's declaration. And so, I think that's come through a number of different lenses, I suppose. So I'm really fascinated by the B Corporation movement that is continuing to grow across the world. And they will absolutely advocate that this is a whole systems thing. I'm also interested in economic theories, whether it's Thomas Piketty or whether it's actually the donor economics theory of Kate Raworth, who talks about the overshoot of the earth and just staggeringly bad non regenerative processes. So I guess I'm drawn to companies who stand in that space. And we all know some of the big names in this, like Patagonia as an example, who genuinely emit a sense that you can be successful in a capitalist system, but that you don't have to be only extractive and reductive about what you do with the resources that you have. So they very firmly stand behind their proposition. You know, Yvon Chouinard says, "Let my people surf," right? So he's pretty much saying we can look at people as not just depletable resources, but as a duty of care to look after them so that they regenerate, because actually we'll get more value from them. So I'm really seeing a shift. I was inspired a little bit by an Oxford Said Business School professor, Colin Mayer, who wrote a book called Prosperity. So I was drawn to it. I really wanted to understand what he meant by that term. And he said, we've got the lenses of value quite distinctly sort of corrupted towards financial only, when really there are five others: human, social, material, intellectual, and natural. And I can remember in the UK, there was a council in the city of Sheffield who put a financial value on their trees because they recognised their both sort of natural beauty but also oxygenation. You know, they literally were saying, we've got to put a value on our trees. So if we cut one down, that means we've got to think about the depletion of breathable air in this city. And I'm liking that kind of narrative. So I think it's still a lot of an outlier sort of principle, but I think it's becoming more mainstream.
Before Marcus comes in, I can tell he wants to, but I'm going to jump in quickly. I think it's really great that they're starting to actually put numbers on those things because, with the best will in the world towards accountants and CFOs and FDs, if they can't put a number in a spreadsheet, they don't have any
No,
way to communicate
no,
up
no,
or down. So finding
totally.
that tangible numeric equivalent is
Yeah,
really, really important.
yeah, totally right, Troy.
Yeah, and I think to start with the numbers, but then maybe drive this further. So my question is then exactly, if it's not the financial anymore, if it's not the CFO anymore who holds all that in his box of gold, um, is it
Yeah,
who would be sort of then the first person to start doing this? And there's obviously,
mm,
I take your
mm,
title, and there's other titles that have
mm,
tried to be created to,
yeah,
chief people officer and whatnot. Is it then those people
yeah,
who have to sort of start with that, or do you think it makes more sense to get these things differently onto the board and actually instead introduce something? You know what? Our one page report of the month will include a number
yeah,
or a
yeah,
color or anything to visualize that value.
yeah,
So
yeah,
what have you seen what people actually done? Because I've been in a lot of different positions where it was about innovation and other aspects, and you given the label and you put in there amongst
yeah,
400 other people, and no one
yeah,
really listens in the end.
yeah.
What's your observations?
Mm, mm. So my observation is that it isn't rich enough in the way you're describing. I'd love to see it. I mean, I think just to answer your point about ownership, I think you're absolutely right that what we've got to create is people who stand in the space of, this is my function and this is the value I create, and it won't always equate to a financial value. However, we can connect it to financial value, but there is more at play, and I think we've got to get better at having those conversations so that we can truly balance the scorecard. I'll give you one example. Actually, there is the toy manufacturer in the US called Mattel, and what they've managed to secure is that each operational leader, so whether it's a vice president or president of a function, has a number of different success criteria in their business plan, but their primary first, second, or third goals that they have to report on are all about people, their own people, their supply chain, and I guess the
Sure.
community. Then they have financial returns, product, investment in R&D. And I really love that because that's a commitment to saying, right, no matter what, the first goals we're going to talk about are human goals. Um, that might sound just like a reordering of the priorities, but I think it's symbolic. I think it says Mattel as a company is recognizing that without people to both purchase the products, build the products, sell the products, and advocate the products, it's not worth it.
And
Yeah,
then
and
how
I
does that go on, Marcus?
so I got just a quick wrap up for that one because, and I just did an exercise on that for a client of mine, and they deal in sustainability. So for there, it was interesting to see when we did some research that actually what they're doing is not just, and sorry the pun, saving energy in terms of literally, carbon emissions and saving energy, but actually people who want to work for a company who has a clear sustainability plan and efforts, uh, they're more likely to hire the right people or better people because people want to go there because
Yeah,
they're better companies.
yeah,
So what we managed to do
totally.
there actually is translate
Yeah,
some of that will impact your retention rate. And your retention rate, there's a number behind it. That will
yeah,
cost you a few thousand a year. We can actually bring that
completely,
down by just doing this
completely,
stuff. And
totally,
it's exactly as you said.
totally that.
It's about start tying these things up and
Thanks.
evidencing that there is a correlation
Yeah,
actually. That's brilliant. Sorry, Troy.
brilliant, brilliant. Good to hear.
Um, so back to your point that you were starting to say, people at Mattel, and of course, being an American
Mm.
from Missouri, I know Mattel very well. Grew up with a lot of Mattel kind of toys. I think it's great to hear that those kind of things
Mm.
happen. You use an expression in the book called peak work. So how
Mm.
does that kind of map into this kind of human kind of centered, kind of employee focused, and yet still getting
Yeah.
peak work? How do you align those two?
Yeah, so I kind of stole the phrase a little bit where I heard about the whole I guess you'd say game of commerce and the production of money. So it was a speaker from Triodos Bank who talked about a concept I think of peak lending, and what he said is quite literally that if we all paid our debts back, the whole economic system would collapse because money only comes into existence when we go into debt. And I'd never been taught that before. So this term peak lending, I was like, wow, that's incredible. Like there is no point in lending anymore, but actually we still have to because otherwise the thing will collapse. So I took the peak concept into the working environment, and what I was seeing. So this is like my 30 plus years in the workspace, is that people were reporting 60, 80 plus hours per week regularly in all sorts of areas, not just first year graduates at Goldman Sachs, which is so very apt at the moment. But people in healthcare, people in emergency services, people in retail, people doing 2 or 3 jobs because they're gigging with Deliveroo and whatever, whatever. And I'm like, how on earth have we got to that situation? Because some research will tell you that labor saving devices have probably given us about 50% of our former out of work time back, but we've filled it with work. Now, I love what I do and I don't really put a clock on it, but there are lots of people who are doing it because they have to, not because they want to. And I got the sense that we've got no more left to give. We've hit peak work. We can't expect people to work 120 hours a week. Even Goldman Sachs have now reneged on their previous 100-hour mantra. So I'm just thinking we've got to redress the balance. And in a TEDx talk, I talked about unplugging from the matrix because that's absolutely what it felt like. We are just being depleted and there's no more left. So we've got to unplug. Now, that could cause the whole thing to collapse, but I think we've got an opportunity to redesign so that we think differently about the energy we have, how we use it, so that we don't work more, but we just work cleverer and more in harmony with our mind, spirit, and actual sort of intellect.
So,
Mm.
you have a bit of you have a section in there where you're looking at into the crystal ball of 2050, and it's very interesting. So can you tell us a little bit more about uh, Protopia in contrast to what we hear in the media today and the very full forms of dystopia and the books of the 1970s, utopia and those kind of things? So can you elaborate, please, on that?
Yeah, thanks, Marcus. Yeah, I guess being a very optimistic, dreamy type, I would normally veer towards utopia. I would think, yeah, we can solve this. And even at the beginning of the pandemic, I was thinking, actually, this is going to be incredibly useful for us to decouple from orthodox ways of working and rewire the way we work. So, and I still think that, even though I see reports of companies urging their people back into the office and government saying, oh, well, it'll all go back to how it was. So I guess we constantly get bombarded with a sort of semi-dystopian sense that actually we're self-destructive and nothing will ever change. Yet I do see some phenomenal advancements with social movements and with collective energy and with people rallying behind cause that I'm thinking the fight isn't over yet. The fight probably hasn't even begun. And I discovered the Protopia concept when I read a book about the inevitables in technology from Kevin Kelly, the editor of Wired magazine. And I'd never seen the phrase before, but I loved it because I think it captured what I sense is a more pragmatic, realistic, and possibility-led version of the future, rather than a dreamy ideology that actually we'll all just get disappointed about if it doesn't arrive pretty soon, or the constant drudge of dystopia where people are like, oh, it's never going to get any better. Well, that will be a self-fulfilling prophecy. So Protopia says incrementally we can see changes, and we have to adopt a mindset which is what I'm doing better, cleverer, more impactful, create more value than yesterday? Because if not, it's down to me potentially to deal with the circumstances I find myself in and just create almost like a series of micro futures, smaller, achievable, attainable goals. What I was really drawn to it for was because I see the benefit in how software production has shifted since the advent of the Agile Manifesto. I used to work in software not as a programmer but as a user, and I saw how ridiculously bureaucratic and slow and cumbersome and unfulfilling technology development was before Agile. Now I see it as this thriving, iterative, constantly improving way of operating. And I guess I just adopted the same approach for the operating system of work, that we just need to think about incrementals, gradual progressive change, rather than huge steps that we always seem to think are going to happen so that we notice it. There's a futurist called Tom Cheesewright, and he's got a really nice definition for this. He says we have a series of low frequency changes and then the occasional high frequency change. And I think we've seen a high frequency change with remote and home working in COVID, but we'd already seen lots of low frequency changes where internet accessibility and portable technology and so on have given us the chance to work like this. So I think Protopia is low frequency change.
Yeah, it's really fascinating because you can see that in so many other areas. And I always wonder if that agile approach in parts came from design as well, maybe less. But in design, we've done this a lot with prototyping and, in product design, it goes back to the 60s. So that's been existing a lot, where you just try lots of different small variations and see what works back, borderline doing evolutionary kind of design in a way. And Agile does this too. And it's also not quite surprising because when you look at code and object-oriented thing, it's been atomizing and working in safe, smaller buckets of code has become a standard long before Agile was a thing. So, and I find it really interesting that this is now applying everywhere else because things are becoming so complex and becoming wicked problems with high uncertainty levels that you can't take bigger risks anymore. You have to take tons of small risks. So I'm always fascinated to see how these things are connecting, and that is something everyone can pick up and is quite valuable. So it's a really interesting concept.
Yeah.
And
Totally agree with you. I'm a big fan of Buckminster Fuller's approaches, and that's what he's been advocating for years. So totally.
Yeah.
So speaking of energy and kind of out of characteristics, you talk about the various chakras and you talk about ikigai. And I think they're really, really amazing concepts to bring into a concept of discussion about the energized workplace. Tell us your experience and tell us how other people can bring these kind of Eastern methodologies and thinking into their work.
Yeah. So I will tell a story that the publisher originally rejected that and I insisted that it go in because I'm a very compliant author, but that was so fundamentally important for me. When they rejected it, they said, look, this has no place in a business book. And I looked at their recent publications and said,
wow,
you've just pushed a whole book out about mindfulness. So I think you can get me a chapter. And they backed away. So that was good. Right, so there is a story that I tell in the book, and I'll do a really short version of it here. I met a PhD student who just blew my mind when he told me about a device that could measure quantum energy in human beings, which I had no idea we emitted
What?
on a regular basis.
Wow.
Yes. So it was from Soviet Russia, so pre Glasnost, and what it did, it was nodes that were pinned to the fingertips of athletes largely, and it would measure their quantum energy. So somehow it was able to capture that and report on it. Now, clearly, they wanted to know how to read the data, and they found that if they mapped it to the zones of chakra, that it could tell them where there was a likely injury going to occur by an anomaly in the readouts from this device. I mean, I'm just kind of looking at this guy going, really? And he then tells me two stories. One was an athlete, I think it was a javelin thrower, who was told not to practice because they looked like the report was reporting an energy disturbance in their sort of lower left leg. And they kind of ignored it. And guess what happened? They tore the calf muscle. And so I'm like, wow. And then this guy tells me that his wife was a dentist, and he had the machine from the original sort of Soviet use, and so he got a friend of his to just do a readout and put it to the chakras, and there was a kind of anomaly in the facial area. Anyway, it turns out that about 3 days later, this guy turned up at his wife's dental practice with an abscess. And he's like, oh my goodness me, this thing really works. Now, I'm not a yoga practitioner. I know a little bit about this area. So I did consult with somebody who was a very, very highly qualified yoga practitioner. And she helped me craft the section about chakras, because I just thought it needed to come in as a way of saying, do you know what, there are some things that we might dismiss, but dismiss at your peril. And this might be one of them. And so it started to unravel in my mind that leaders particularly are in a position where they're often exhausted. They might feel a little bit like something's not quite right, but they steam on anyway. And then they're making decisions about multi-million-dollar merger and acquisitions after no sleep and really bad chakra energy. And then they wonder why it goes wrong. And I'm kind of thinking it isn't just about intellect, this thing, and it isn't even just about biological essence of energy. There's this force, there's this thing. There are sometimes leaders who, have respect for their fellow leaders, but just don't get on. And what they probably have is a misaligned vibration in their chakras that they just don't know how to interpret and read. So there's some really interesting things, I think, about human energy that we haven't really been able to scientifically explain. But Reiki practitioners and yoga practitioners will tell you this stuff is absolutely how they can sort of apply their trade. And I just found out that it was about a $15 billion business, yoga. I'm like, wow. So that's why it's there, really. It's there because it's something to think about.
So to move from Eastern philosophy and yoga practitioners and Reiki, how do we then move to the other extreme, which is the 20 kind of chemical letters associated with the
Mm.
forms of energy towards the end of the book?
Yeah. So I really, really wanted people to have a sense that they could read this book and not just go, well, that was interesting, and shut the cover and not change their lives. Now, I discovered, I guess, the whole sense of behavioral economics and nudge theory and incremental marginal gains. And I thought there's something in this that we can do to help people nudge themselves towards a better understanding of their energies. So I interviewed as many people as I could about what things they could track in a journaling exercise at work that sparked their energy. And so some people came back with some reports and said, look, I was a pretty flat like day and I had a really bad kind of conversation. But then somebody sent me something that enabled me to do some research and I suddenly came to life. And I was like, what was that all about? They were like, I was suddenly sparked because I was learning something new and I forgot about my bad instance. And all of a sudden my energy changed and I got through and I created a sort of breakthrough report. And I'm like, wow, this stuff's interesting. So all of that came back and I started to kind of categorize it. And I thought, how can I represent this? I had no idea. And I thought chemical elements, because these are almost chemical stimulus that happen
Right.
when we learn stuff, when we are complimented, when we are in a discovery phase, when we're taxed by a complex problem so that we can intellectually sort of. Because I've often wondered, why do people sit and do Sudoku puzzles on a train on a bus, I'd look at it and think, what a pointless exercise. But for them, it's a bit of mental gymnastics. And when they've done it, they get a sense of euphoria. So I guess it's all the things that help us shift our physical position and our mental stimulus. That's why I came up with those things. Some people are stimulated because they go introspectively, and some people are stimulated because they're around other people. So there's a little bit of Jungian theory coming through here, but it wasn't just about that. So once I distilled them down, I wanted to give people some tips. And this 20-minute theme was just like, we could surely find 20 minutes just to work on one thing to help us be the agents of our own kind of energized nature, even if the system around us is still a bit of a struggle. So that was the thinking behind it. And a few people have read the book and come back and said, I've started to journal and practice those things, and it has made a difference. So I think it's to be personalized and it's to be explored, but I think it gives people a little bit of something to do.
Yeah, it's really like, I think if the last year has taught me anything, it's surely to listen to some of those aspects more. I'm just on the edge of being a bit more intro than extro, as much as I'm running, with this podcast and things. But the I found that even so, I'm always quite comfortable by myself, that actually suddenly things were draining more around about August last year. And I started to do the same thing. So the good thing, I had picked up running, so I would step out for an hour or something, and that really cleared my head. And I think now I'm doing this a bit more often in smaller pieces as well, where you just step out. Having worked in the creative sector as well, and having come up with ideas and problem solving more, you need that, right? You need a break, a refocus. Sometimes internalizing things, sometimes reflecting things. And there's a lot of theory on exactly that. Having reflective moments in any shape or form helps massively with learning, helps massively with focus. And, even on that level, there's definitely something there. So that as a little anecdote, I find that really, 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 really interesting.
Nice.
But that also sounds like, and brings me, I guess, to our second last question, I guess, because of time. Troy will follow with the last one there. It sounds there's a lot that we have to start with ourselves, in ourselves, more than maybe trying to have something controlled from the top, or collectively suddenly manage to get 100 people on board of something. So, and it's a bit in your book, and can you comment a bit on that, sort of maybe starting with yourself and what your thoughts are on that?
Yeah, I guess there's a few things in my mind, and I suppose one of them is the fact that we are in a very sort of individualistic era, I guess, and the technological sort of access has bizarrely sort of amplified that. I think, even though we've got social networks where we're connected to thousands, if not millions, of people, isolation seems to be an increasingly powerful sort of force that people are having to battle. Yet the agency to change is often there. Sometimes it's all about people being a bit lost in themselves. So the individual nature of the world has forced, I guess, some more introverted actions to an extreme, and therefore people then struggle to help themselves, whereas before they may have had other people stimulate, spark, and care for them. So so I think the individual thing is trying to play into that, but flip the energy. So it's not destructive individualism, it's not isolating individualism. It is looking at yourself as an energy vessel. And I suppose, just talking to the elements that you've brought into your life, Marcus, I'm the same when it comes to work. When I had a routine where I had to commute and waste time traveling to things that I could have done virtually, I found myself having to snatch at work at my absolute cognitive peak. My cognitive peak is around about 6 a.m. to about 9 a.m. in the morning. That's it. I am better in those 3 hours than probably any time during the day. And I've seen some neuroscience research that says actually the brain's only optimal for about 2 hours a day anyway. It's always then suboptimal after that. No matter what you do to try and regenerate it, you've got this peak bit. And then after that, it's just topping it up a little bit. So I thought, oh, wow, I get to now use those 2 optimal hours at what I know is my best too. So I've reduced the interference around me by circumstance, and I'm continuing to do that now. So that realization in me is something I wanted others to know more about. Know your patterns, know your flow, know your stimulus, know your low points. Be kind to yourself and accept that sometimes you might want to work, but your energy system is kind of going, it's dangerous, don't do it. Just stop and do something different instead. And I've often had a deadline and thought, oh no, I needed to complete that. And then the next morning I'm up, and the next morning I've smashed it. And I'm thinking, I did like an hour's productive work versus 5 absolutely awful, terrible, raggedy work. What am I best doing? So I think that's why the individual side of things is pretty important, so that we can break away from some of those cliches and conditions we're told. That we can do long hours, and 6 hours sleep we pretty much need every day. So it's those kind of things, really.
So the last thing I want to say is a compliment to you, and it's a general
Thank you.
state of the world to a lot of other people. I have referred to HR as human remains for the
Yeah,
majority of my professional career. The
yeah,
only position, the only reason for human remains to exist is to hire people, and the day
yeah,
after they're hired, to make it easy for them to be fired and to easy to get rid of them. And
mm,
everything else is just window dressing about
yeah,
training and welfare
yeah,
and perks and benefits. And
yeah.
the reason it's a compliment to you is you sound like someone who is actually in human resources and is
Thank
looking
you.
at the business of managing human
Yeah,
capital and really
yeah.
treating them like people and
Mm,
not a resource to be demolished. So
thank you.
I wish more HR people would read your book and listen and
Thank
start
you.
following some of the things. And I wish more business leaders would take on
Good.
some of your ideas. It's been a real
Thank you.
joy talking to you today.
That's so nice, and you don't know how much that means to me, because I have struggled a little bit inside my profession where people have looked at me as a little bit of an outlier, and even said, "You've never been an HR director. What would you know?" And I've often thought about that, and it's kind of damaged me a little bit. But I've equally come back with a retort when people have said, "Why didn't you want to be an HR director?" And I said, "Well, from what I've seen, we've got some good people there who are doing senior leader adult daycare, and I didn't want to do that." So I can equally come back at them with, I think we've, underwhelmed the world for too long, and we've played the wrong cards. And now's the chance to really go, hang on, what the world needs now is people who come alive. We've got the gift of looking after their interests. And it's a crime, really, to not do that. So I'm backing what you're saying, Troy. And if I've got any part in pivoting that towards better, then I'm really happy with that.
Great. Thank you so much for being on the show today, and we wish you a
Pleasure.
great Easter holiday.
You too, guys. Thanks ever so much for the chance. Love talking with you, and can't wait to share this podcast. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Barry.
You've been listening to The Wicked Podcast with co-host Marcus Kirsch and me, Troy Norcross.
Please subscribe on Podomatic, iTunes, or Spotify. You can find all relevant links in the show notes. Please tell us your thoughts in the comment section and let us know about any books for future episodes.
You can also get in touch with us directly on Twitter on @WickedandBeyond or @Troy_Norcross. Also, learn more about the Wicked Company book and the Wicked Company project at wickedcompany.com.